Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and this week we're asking the question, will I ever feel good enough for my job? Thank you so much for downloading this week's episode, Will I Ever Feel Good Enough for My Job? As ever, I'm joined by a co-host. This week I'm joined by Lizzie Elston. So Lizzie, what are we going to talk about today?
So today we're talking about something which affects a lot of people, imposter syndrome, which is really the sense of feeling like a fraud in our jobs. And we've got some fantastic stories which are coming up, and in fact people listening will be able to relate, no doubt, to some of the stories, but they're also going to be able to take a test, George, which I took before the podcast. I'm sure you have as well. Yeah. Which really looks at some of the characteristics of imposter syndrome, and it gives you an opportunity to assess your own characteristics. Have you taken the test?
Yes, and it revealed that I had moderate imposter syndrome, which was interesting. I think good to kind of classify it and give a sense of how much I fear about being unmasked. Perhaps either as a fledgling podcast host, but perhaps more seriously in my professional and personal life. So.
Yeah, no, I had the same actually, and for people listening, the scores will either sort of rate you as having very low levels of imposter syndrome or none at all, through to those with moderate, which like yourself, George, I've got some moderate leanings towards it, those who experience frequent feelings of it, and then those who have a lot greater impact of imposter syndrome, which really affect their lives. So no, it was interesting going through the test and recognising a number of things that affected me.
There's a lot of people with huge amounts of success throughout history who've experienced this. I think from Maya Angelou, who was very sort of public about her fears of her own of being defrauded or unmasked, perhaps. Albert Einstein as well sort of shared these fears, and even more recently, one of the most famous women on the planet, Michelle Obama, sort of spoke about her anxiety on this.
Kids like me feel like they don't belong, and I had to work to overcome that question that I always ask myself, am I good enough? And I write about that. That's a question that has dogged me for a good part of my life. Am I good enough to have all of this? Am I good enough to be the First Lady of the United States? And I think that many women, and definitely many young girls of all backgrounds, walk around with that question. But how I overcame that is how I overcome anything: hard work. So whenever I doubted myself, I just told myself, let me put my head down and do the work. And I would let my work speak for itself. And I still find that I do that. I still feel that at some level I have something to prove because of the color of my skin, because of the shape of my body, because of who knows how people are judging me.
Speaking just then was Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, and I think it's quite surprising to see that she had these fears about being unmasked and through imposter syndrome as well. Sadly, Michelle's not able to join us today, but we have some excellent guests, which Lizzie's going to introduce.
Indeed. Thanks so much for joining us. First of all, we have Sharon Thorne. Sharon joined our audit business straight out of university. She's held various leadership roles and was the first female member of the UK executive as managing partner for talent. She is a leading champion of our ambition to achieve gender parity and the executive sponsor of Globe, our LGBT+ network. She's been at the forefront of the creation of Deloitte Northwest Europe. And today, Sharon is our managing partner at Global and Strategy and also our deputy CEO for Deloitte NWE. Hi, Sharon.
Hello.
Poppy Jaman. Poppy is an internationally respected mental health advocate, national policy advisor and social entrepreneur. She is the CEO of the City Mental Health Alliance, a coalition of city businesses working to increase understanding of mental health issues and to create a culture of good mental health. She is also the former CEO and a co-founder of Mental Health First Aid England. In 2018, Poppy was awarded an OBE in recognition of her services to people with mental health issues. Poppy, welcome.
Hi.
So, George, that takes us on to a bit of an icebreaker challenge, I think. The time where we all just get ourselves warmed up and we can learn a bit more about each other. Hopefully it won't be anything too tricky. So as ever, we've got the bucket here in front of us. I'm just going to pick one out. So the question is, what's the last thing that made you smile? Sharon, should we start with you?
Seeing my dogs. So I have 2 golden doodles, and whenever I come home from work or whenever we get up in the morning, they just go wild with excitement, and you just can't help have this enormous smile on your face.
It was obviously Valentine's Day yesterday, so my husband sent me a text to meet him at London Bridge Station at 5:30, and we had a really great evening. We went to an art gallery, and then we went for some cocktails, and then we went for some really nice food in Leicester Square. So it's been a really lovely evening. And actually, George's Valentine's socks has added to my smile.
Yeah, unfortunately the listeners can't benefit from George's socks today, but just to, put some colour around them, they have got big red hearts on, and we're all enjoying them.
That's right, yeah. These are a lovely gift from my daughter, who made me smile yesterday, where she informed me that she's 3.5 and she has a boyfriend at her preschool. Some chap called Jacob, but she said she still loves her daddy more, so that's good. So
That's a relief.
Yeah.
Exactly. So great. Well, thank you, Poppy and Sharon, so much for coming down today.
What made me smile?
Oh yeah, sorry. So Lizzie, what made you smile last?
I had quite a good laugh actually yesterday morning on Valentine's Day morning. My mother had kindly brought around a chocolate cake for my son, and we'd left it on the kitchen table, and it had Happy Valentine's Day from ? And my son came in, he was very excited to find this cake for him, and I said, who do you think it's from? And he reeled off a list of people, including Andrew, his Christmas elf. But my name didn't come into it, which just goes to show how little I cook cakes. It just shows how rubbish I am.
You're not the chief baker.
Yeah, exactly. I know. So the fact that a Christmas elf came above me on the list was a bit made me laugh.
Sweet.
Yeah, without sort of further ado, let's try and deep dive into this week's question, which is, will I ever feel good enough in my job? And I suppose, Sharon, if you're able to maybe describe in your own words what imposter syndrome is and what you perceive it to be, that'd be great.
So I think it's this feeling, you've been working for a number of years, and you've managed to get to a certain position, but you're still waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, you've got away with it for a long time, but we found you out, and you're going to have to leave. You are not good enough. You've been able to skate over things and get to where you've got to, but actually, fundamentally, you can't really do the job. So you're going to have to move on. So that it's that feeling of you're not good enough, that the people around you have much greater capabilities, and when you watch them, that you sort of have this feeling of inadequacy because they just look so much smarter, better. You don't feel. It'll be different things for different people, but do you feel smart enough? And that is a fundamental that has been with me for a very long time, and you overcome it, and I'm sure we'll get onto it. At different times in your life, it's not particularly prevalent, and then something will happen. You'll maybe get a new job, or you'll be put into a situation which is much more challenging and demanding, and all of those fears just come rushing back. And people who work with me think I'm incredibly confident, and if they hear about this issue I have, they're really surprised, and then you almost think, do they think I'm lying? Because it's another fear. Another part of the imposter thing is, oh my goodness, they must think I'm lying. But even very recently, I'm in the process of taking on a new role from the 1st of June, which isn't currently public, but it will be soon. But I went to Davos as part of my induction for, I suppose, this new role. And I felt completely out of place. I felt, what am I doing here? I'm not as good as these people. I'll never fit in. And I hadn't felt that bad for quite a long time. And I was quite shocked because I've in my current role, I've been doing it for a number of years. I've got quite comfortable. And even though I end up getting some quite challenging things, I've been overcoming them and it's not been an issue. And so you sort of think, yeah, I'm in a good place. And then suddenly it was like, oh my goodness, it's still there and it's still very powerful, and it has a really debilitating effect on you.
Yeah, and I would echo everything that you're saying, Sharon. And for me, it's less about being found out. The overriding feeling I have is about public humiliation. Like so it's like I'm going to mess up so badly in this moment. So it's sort of that. It presents itself in a lot of fear and anxiety that this is the moment that I'm going to fail, and so I mean I think it's the same thing but two slightly different angles, and it presents itself, and then in terms of it's got a positive and a negative, because actually I think over my life I've been so driven to prove everybody wrong, and that everybody is made up in my head, I think, mostly as well, because actually most people are just getting on with their lives and probably don't really care what I'm up to. But to prove, and there's some truth in that as well, to prove everybody wrong that I am as successful as I am in my career. But I very rarely feel that, and I think a bit like your Davos story, I was thinking about what's the sort of the last time that I've had that massive surge of, oh my goodness, I'm definitely not good enough and everybody's definitely cleverer than me, and what on earth am I doing here, was on the 10th of October 2017, Tuesday. I was invited to a cabinet meeting by the Prime Minister and Jeremy Hunt, the Minister for Health at the time, to do a presentation on England's public mental health campaign. And you know, it was incredible to be invited to, I was going to present to the PM and the cabinet, and wow. And then it was that whole, oh my God, like, why do they want me there? Is it because I'm a black woman? Is it because I'm representing mental health and actually do you know what I mean? So I got into justifying, it's not really me they want in that room. It's actually the agendas that I represent. So immediately I undermined myself completely. And then on the day, Simon Wesley, who was then the chair of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, he was sort of the second person. So he and I were both invited. I was leading it, and he was supposed to do one slide at the last 2 minutes, which was around the technicalities. But when Simon and I met, I was like, oh, well, you should definitely go first and you lead that. And that's another thing that we'll do, because I think by default I thought, well, he's much cleverer than me. I mean, he's a scientist and he's a medic, and of course he should show, and he's a man, so why, I'm just a BME woman. And then he looked at me and he just went, this is your gig. You're the expert here. Yeah. I'm the technical support, so I'll do that bit, and let's work out how we're going to do it. And it was a lovely moment where I was reminded on a very practical level that I was the expert. This was my area of expertise. He was there to support me, and that's what we were doing. So to then walk in, and then just a bit of insight in terms of the background. I mean, I didn't sleep that night, the night before, because you just wouldn't anyway. I imagine you get that a bit.
Yes.
You don't sleep. And then I got completely obsessed with how I needed this document, my notes, to be printed out in a certain way. So the perfectionism comes down to, I needed it printed out in this way. It was 3:00 in the morning. The hotel printer office that wasn't, so I walked for 25 minutes to find a print room the other side of London to get the document printed in exactly how I wanted it, because my anxiety and the imposter syndrome had got so desperate that I was clutching onto every single thing needed to be perfect. And just to end that, I mean, I was brilliant. I got 2 rounds of bangings on the table, which is what you get, so you don't get claps. And I got lots of really great feedback at the end saying, it is very rare that you get 2 bangings on the table. and but in the room, I had to make eye contact. There was a couple of female ministers, and I made eye contact with them, and they smiled back, and that's what grounded me. So there's some real practical things that I've learned in my experience of the imposter syndrome when it really presents itself in that level of power that I can do in the room. And I guess I always do the same for other women, or when I sense that someone might be feeling a bit, I do that big, I'm smiling at you, and I've got your eye contact, and I've got you. So you're kind of giving off that vibe but yeah, I mean, it's incredibly powerful because it drives me, but it's incredibly difficult because I imagine that would have been a much more enjoyable experience if I didn't have all of those things that went. And Simon seemed to love it. He come out and he was like, that was really great. We were brilliant, weren't we? And we took a selfie outside number 10. And I wanted to say, actually, it was really fun, but you've got no idea how much I've suffered in the build up to it. And I wouldn't change it for because it's groundbreaking. I think it's amazing that I was there, and it sets the precedents for other BME women, but it's tough being the first as well. I think we were talking about that earlier as well.
Yeah, so I was saying that I was the first female on our UK executive back in 2006, and I was made the talent partner. And to your point, you sort of think, there's a part of you that thinks, well, I'm here because I'm a female and they need a female. And there aren't many of us around who are able to take on this role. So I've sort of got it by default. And the thing that helped me, I suppose, quite a lot to begin with is a sort of, I was still reasonably young in my career. And you have a natural naivety and passion and excitement that carries you through in many circumstances. But then at some point you suddenly look around the room and you feel not only were they all men, but they were all quite a bit older than me on average, and just that bit more experience. And so that sort of, once you start getting into some more challenging debates around things, it's like, well, they're all much cleverer than me. Their point of view is much better, so I'll make a contribution. But then if I get much pushback, I won't carry on, or I'll try and find different ways of dealing with it. And you then don't make the contribution you're capable of making. Yeah. You know, and quite often there'll be a discussion and someone will say something and you think, oh, well, I was thinking that. But I didn't say it because I didn't want to look stupid. Yeah. Or, and they're going to think, ridiculous female. And it is very hard when you're in I honestly think it's so important, and your 30% club is critical, that in any board or executive that there are, at least 3 women. Because a single female on their own, it is just very hard. You definitely have a different point of view. And it's not that all women think the same, but that you just bring a degree of diversity that's very important to allow people to give different points of view. So, as I say, the sort of the naivety did get traded off. And then when I went onto the executive when David Sproul became CEO, there were 3 women, so that was a good start, really, really positive. However, I still felt this. I was, managing partner of the regions, but all of these people are based in London and they're much cleverer than me. And, there are some hugely intelligent people on the executive, and I just think, well, and they're very articulate, so we should listen to them. And I'm not going to give my point of view, and I'll talk about my piece rather than, and then suddenly you think, we're supposed to be running the firm as a team, and so we all need to contribute, and it's getting the confidence and it doesn't change overnight, but suddenly because you just focus on your job and doing it, and before you realize it, then you are a really integral part of the team and making those contributions without thinking about it, just because you don't focus on what's going on inside you.
And is it that pioneer sort of element to it? I mean, Poppy, if you went back to number 10 and did that presentation again, would you feel that same level of anxiety and imposter syndrome to build up to it, or do you think it'll be a smoother process? And I suppose, Sharon, similarly, if you entered that boardroom again for the first time, having done it already, I suppose it gets easier each time, does it? Yeah.
I think it definitely does get easier, and I think I've been really lucky, and that I'm surrounded by amazing people like yourself, Sharon. So it's you know, I've had these conversations with peers and female colleagues that we've kind of outed it a little bit in the networks that we're in. But I've also over the years had quite a lot of coaching and quite a lot of counselling as well for my own mental health issues and stuff. So what I've been in a privileged position is that I can see it coming, and therefore some of those sort of conversations, the coaching techniques around grounding myself, reminding myself of the number 10 incident, you know, back in 2017, and going, you presented to the PM, like, you know, come on, you
get much better than that.
It's all right, we can do this, and so it's sort of reminded. So I have to have like a checklist of things that, yeah. So you're nodding as well, Sharon. So so I imagine you do the same. You've got your own little routine, which back in the day, before I had therapy and before I had coaching, I used to physically chuck up before events. So I used to go to, and then that was just part of what I did. I didn't actually.
It's part of the process.
Yeah. So because nobody told me, and you know, and I guess in my early 20s, I was in rooms with senior people. So and again, I sort of went, oh well, that's just because I'm a BME woman, or I've just in the right place and I got lucky, and which is why I'm here. I never kind of went, I'm incredibly talented, and actually I deserve to be in this room, and actually these people need me in this room because the ideas that I bring, and I'm action orientated. So if you want something done, give it to me and it'll happen. So I never took those things on as skills and assets. I just felt very lucky to be in those rooms because I thought, oh, thanks to Malcolm who invited me to this meeting. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't really look at my skill set, just felt really lucky to be in those rooms. But because I had no idea what this anxiety stuff was about, I just thought, well, that's what I do. I go to a meeting, but before I go, I just nip to the bathroom, chuck up, and then it was much later on that I realised that wasn't really normal, and that was part of the anxiety, and that was part of the feeling of not belonging. And then as I grew up and grew older and wiser, it was right, okay, here's a checklist. So I no longer chuck up. So you'd like to, you know, just I didn't chuck up before I came here, but actually I have a check, you know, when I'm feeling it creep up, I go, right, here's a reminder, and these are some of the grounding conversations. So sometimes it's less prevalent because I'm more experienced and a bit wiser, but depending on what's happening in life, actually it might peak and be really like your Davos experience. I mean, my goodness, you look at you and look who you are and what you're doing, yet you were there and it just came up. It's a bit of a surprise, isn't it, when it's like that?
It was massive, and it was also as I say, I actually felt physically. I didn't chuck up, fortunately.
Really good to know.
but I did feel, and I had to go back to my hotel room and just work and ground myself back into work. I spoke to my husband. And he, you know, I mean, obviously he understands me. And you know, your point about how you've discussed it quite a lot with people around you, we don't discuss it enough. And it's partly because you feel, if I show this vulnerability and this weakness, and I say to people, I don't think I'm good enough, then they're going to think, she's not good enough.
So he thinks it's sort of self-perpetuating.
Yes, but I actually, when I do mentoring of people, I find it very easy to talk about because I love helping people, and I can see just a small little bit of coaching, how it can help transform them and any doubts they have. But I can't do it to myself, you know, and you do need people to help you. So that, you know, that you talked about some of the things that you do, and I have now had counselling, and I had some senior leadership development sort of training about 3 years ago, and it was a fantastic female called Christine, who's sort of basically identified just how enormously self-critical I am and how it undermines my ability to fully be, I suppose, myself and successful. If you don't, well, it's difficult because I've done okay, haven't I? But
I think you've done better than okay.
she said, she was like, it's just holding you back from just giving everything. And so she recommended therapy, and no one had ever suggested it to me before, and it really, really helped.
Yeah.
But it's still, as I say, it's still in Davos. Suddenly you're like, and that's why I was so shocked, because it developed quite reasonably successfully in terms of the coping strategies, and it was just that reminder that you can, deep down, if you have this lack of self-belief, the coping strategies can't overcome that. You do need a deeper intervention around some sort of counselling and therapy.
I think we're going to talk a bit more about sort of how it feels and some of the sort of tricks we can use to manage it. But just before we get onto that, who does this affect? I mean, I think historically it was seen as being something affecting women only, but actually it sounds as if it affects all people across, different generations and genders, etc. What's your views on that?
I think I'm not overly familiar with all the data, but I've read reports that actually, I think you started off this podcast saying about 70% of people experience it. So I wonder whether it's less about in the current climate in London, in the UK. I mean, I imagine it's different in different countries, with different cultural norms, etc. But I imagine is it something that people that are in high performing roles particularly feel, and is it actually that conundrum of they're that driven and they're that good, and because they've got this underlying insecurity about not being good enough, but I guess it takes away from having well-being, I suppose, enjoyment, fulfillment. If you're constantly driving to be better, when are you being present to enjoy what you've got?
Yeah, no, it's very valid. I read a few articles in the run-up to this. Obviously, my imposter syndrome driving me on. What don't I know? What else do I need to know? And they were saying 2/3 of women suffer from it, and interestingly, a high proportion of men suffer from it as well. Not quite as many, but the impact on men who suffer from it is greater, because there's this, it's sort of, I suppose, people expect men to be more competent in some way. There's just, again, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? And therefore, men feel even more embarrassed about it, difficult, and therefore their coping mechanisms are not as good as women who have imposter syndrome. But on my way out from work last night, I met a colleague who is a fantastic partner in our financial services consulting business. And I just mentioned I was doing this podcast today. And he said, oh my goodness, I suffer enormously from it. He said, but everyone I know does. And to your point, if you work in a high performance culture, there is just, everyone is, a lot of people feel I'm never good enough. And then you have to think, well, are they, and it's not that they don't enjoy it. So to your point, I get stressed, but I love my job and I love having the opportunities I get. So, so people are enjoying it, but you have to make sure the balance is right. And to your point about well-being, that it doesn't go too far, and that people still really, on balance, get a huge amount out of their job and enjoyment. And the idea that you were saying you would chuck up before is just awful.
No. But I wonder how many young people who haven't had these mentoring opportunities where we are having open conversations, and actually in the city, and and I've worked in the statutory sector, the third sector, and now mostly within the private sector environment. And I guess what I've seen across all of those sectors is we set cultures that are around performance and peak performance. And it varies depending on different groups of people, but the underlying culture is always, we need to be bigger, better, more efficient, more, where do we have the conversation around, we need to do all of those things, but we also need to just be really kind to each other and be more open around, it's all right that you're feeling really stressed, and don't be. But I don't know how that's a long-term change, isn't it? Particularly, I think, in the city and your organisations, in the financial and professional services sector, it is incredibly competitive. And that, everything from how you turn up to a meeting physically to how you turn up mentally, and there is very little room for mistake. And I think if you're a young person, so leading the City Mental Health Alliance, and I'm speaking to quite a lot of sort of young early careers people, and actually once you scratch between this behind the surface, and there's a lot there where people are feeling like, well, I don't feel good enough, there's lots of people out there, the competition is big, actually a few mistakes and I could lose my job. So that pressure to constantly be amazing, it's just unrealistic. We're not constantly amazing, we're just not, because we're human. Yeah. But I think that would then explain quite a lot of men and women experiencing this, because it's sort of moved from being a gender thing in our culture in this country to being a performance thing and being perfect.
I'd never really heard of the phrase imposter syndrome, but clearly I felt that kind of self-doubt in all aspects, from first day at uni and you're in a room full of 200 people in a lecture hall when you're clearly not the cleverest person in that room, but and obviously to in working life as well. But I think actually just classifying it as this is imposter syndrome on some scale.
I think when you start to hear that other people got it, so I suppose think back to where I was working with there weren't many senior women, but there was one, and I managed to work with her and found out she was open about the fact she had it with me. And it was very reassuring, because I was just thinking, you're so amazing, and yet you suffer from this as well, and yet you've had all these amazing achievements, and so if you've got it, then it's okay for me to have it. So that was a positive. But also you can clearly, it doesn't hold you back, which is important. And one of the things I suppose I feel very strongly about, particularly with women who have it, is it can be a positive, to your point about achieving performance, because it does drive you on and you try harder. But where it's a negative is if you don't put yourself forward for something. Yeah. So it's you have to make sure that women or men, whoever has it, that they will think they are good enough to have a go, and that they have got the right experience. And one of the things you were talking about, the coping strategies of just writing down what you're good at and trying to be objective. And if we can all absolutely be rational and objective and do it. And each day you can focus on what has gone well today, rather than, one of the characteristics is that you just focus on the negatives. So you'll do some sort of presentation or whatever it is, and something won't have gone quite right, and you'll just keep thinking, oh no, I can't believe I said that was so stupid, rather than thinking, but I made all these great points. And so it's trying to look at it through a positive filter, and working with people who will reinforce it. One of the issues as you get more senior, I now used to find, as when I was coming up through the grades, I'd get grade 3 feedback or whatever it was, that it sort of helped you, it overcomes the negatives. As you get very senior, there's no one telling you you've done a good job, because you're sort of, it's like you're just you're expected to do it, and people just think you don't need it. Actually, we all do need reinforcement and positive encouragement. So it's, again, looking for, how can I get a little stroke today? Which is why I might ring my husband. I need some love.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. I think, so as CEO of Mental Health First Aid for 10 years, I think when we were a small organisation, originally there was sort of 3 of us, and it was really easy. But by the time I left last year, we were a huge organisation, having trained sort of 350,000 people in England and 6.6 million turnover from sort of, so it was massive. And the last few years, I think, was really challenging, because actually my role was very external, it was very public facing, it was lots of media stuff, etc. And I definitely didn't believe the feedback that I was getting from my colleagues in the business, that was a great interview, or that was because of course they're going to say that I'm the CEO. We're not, they're not going to go, you were rubbish on TV today. it would be so. And even though my peers and my senior leadership team were good friends and people that I'd worked with for years, intellectually I knew I should trust the feedback, but emotionally it was just really difficult to go, would they really tell me the truth? Am I really doing a good job? How does, just this constant sort of question, am I ever going to be good for this, good enough for this CEO job? It never left me, even when I left, even with the OBE, it was still a bit like, that was the whole organisation. It wasn't really my, the OBE, actually, Mental Health First Aid is an amazing business. Everybody's contributed and I happen to get the badge for it. So it's yeah, and I genuinely believe that. So, and I have to remind myself that I played a huge part in it. But but it just doesn't land. And I wish that, I hope there comes a point in life that I do genuinely sort of step into my own skin and feel it all and go, yeah. But I wait for that. Do you like? I love it.
So you can truly enjoy it.
We get it. Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities.
You have such enviable CVs. It's sort of for someone who's comparatively, early in his career, it's quite reassuring, I suppose, that these doubts kind of exist, throughout. But I mean, it took Lizzie about 10 minutes to go through your bios at the start of this podcast, so it never quite goes away, which is good and bad, I suppose. But,
yeah. Well, it makes us humble as well, I suppose. So there's that humility bit that I love about it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. If you're so complacent about, then I don't think you're giving enough to everyone around you either. I think it drives you on to be successful, but it also I care about the people I work with, and to your point, it's a huge number of people working in a team that enable you to achieve anything, and that is very important. And also to take them with you.
Do you think you can spot it in colleagues and the people you work with?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Some people hide it better than others, and because I always think I'm the worst person in the room. But as I said, once you start mentoring people, it's just a wonderful feeling to be able to help. And hopefully with talking about this so openly, it will make more people talk about it. But not everyone feels it. And I can remember a few years ago, a sort of partner asked me if I would mentor a female director in his group. And I'd got so used to having conversations with females and talking about, imposter syndrome. And it didn't register with her at all. And I can remember thinking, she will think I'm a terrible mentor because I've made an assumption almost, and then it didn't land well. And she never came to see me again. So I thought, yeah, I'm rubbish. It's like another.
So she didn't experience these things. I mean,
she just didn't recognise the discussion at all.
Why might some people have this and others not? Is it to do with our childhoods? Is it just bad luck? What sort of the reasons do you think why some experience and some don't?
I'll defer to our mental health expert and then Sharon.
Well, I think adverse childhood events are a big factor in terms of the causation of mental health issues, and so I'm not going to get too technical, but you've got life events that happen. So violence, your own parents having mental health, poor mental health, financial lack of money, poverty. So all of those factors, environmental factors, which we categorise under adverse childhood events, will have an impact on your mental health and mental well-being. And I guess imposter syndrome is distorted thinking, which will develop because actually your confidence and you didn't have a great start to life. But if I relate to my own experience, so cultural differences was definitely, I'm a British Bangladeshi woman. I was raised in a family where definitely, I was raised to, I wasn't raised to be a professional. I was supposed to be a really good mother and a really great wife and a really great daughter and an amazing daughter-in-law. So that was the precedence that was set for me, and I remember my mum going, God, you need to get better at this cooking thing, because you're never going to get a husband. You're never going to get it. You're not going to keep your husband, and your mother-in-law's going to be devastated. So but those were normal conversations in my household as I was growing up. And these were conversations that were taken that I was aware of at 13. But even before then, it was, and I've got 2 younger brothers, so. I remember a conversation that when I got my first regional job, and I went and told my mum that I was like, Mum, I've got this regional job, and she went, well, what are you going to do with the kids? And your brother should have got that job.
Oh wow!
And it was just, and me and my brothers talk about it. We've got like a great. It's not a thing between us, which is why I can share it so publicly. But that's our mum, and that's because she's Bangladeshi, and actually she's grown up within our culture, and there's a lot of amazing things about our culture, but there's also a lot of things that are not pro-women, and the gender inequality is massive, and so there's that factor, I think, for me that made me always think, well, actually I'm less than men because that's how I was raised.
So that is not just a Bangladeshi culture thing, it's prevalent in the whole of our society. And I go back to, my father was in the Navy, and he was very sexist. I can remember as a young child, and I was quite sporty, but he was basically saying, you'll never be able to throw as far as a boy, you'll never be able to do this as well as a boy. And that sort of then reinforced itself in my mind that I was never going to be as good as a boy. So then I was always trying to prove that I could be as good as a boy. But also just, when I can remember at 16, I ran home from school and we'd been talking about university, and no one in my family had ever been to university. And I was like, I want to go to university. And my dad was like, well, why would you want to go to university? It's a complete waste of taxpayers' money. He said, you are going to, get married, have a family, and you'll give up work. And I was like, and so you don't realise that and I'm absolutely sure he would never recollect any of those conversations. But obviously as parents, the impact you can have on your children. And, one of the bits of evidence I was reading before this podcast was saying, by the age of 6, girls think boys are smarter than they are. I mean, how appalling is that? And that's even today, not, millions of years ago when I was a child kind of thing. So it's just so depressing. And I was talking to one of my American female colleagues she's our global officer general counsel. And she was recollecting just the amazingly positive impact her father had on her, because he had 4 girls. And he basically told them, you can be anything you want to be. And you think how wonderful, and that's what we should be doing. And another bit of the evidence I was reading was talking about millennials and how 70% of millennials suffer from imposter syndrome, and it's this that parents are bringing them up, and they're called the trophy generation, and they get this massive praise, but then they also get this criticism, and they're just really struggling. And also all the pressure that social media puts on you. I have come off Facebook. Partly because you just find yourself, you haven't got time for it, but also just, you're constantly seeing all these people doing amazing things, and it does, and given I get the opportunity to do lots of amazing things, and I'm very fortunate, and also you just sort of think, I'm far too ugly to put photos on Facebook kind of thing, it's that sort of like, I might put my dogs on, but they don't want to see me. And again, it's another form of imposter syndrome, isn't it? That you don't feel good enough, and what you're doing isn't exciting enough.
So Poppy, do you think it is improving slowly, but clearly there are challenges with social media and things which may.
I don't know that it is improving, because actually we've got, if you look at the prevalence of mental health, and I think it's going to be the biggest cause of disability worldwide in 15, 20 years. I can't remember the exact stat. So I think we've got. This is just one component that you could look at it from so many different angles. Is it anxiety? Are we talking about mild depression? I don't really care what the categorization is, but the problem is we're not addressing the fact that our well-being, we're not prioritizing. And actually, what success looks like is being defined by how much money we earn, how senior our status is, and all of and I think some of these values, we need to look at our values and reevaluate what is important to us. And I think, again, going back to the younger generation, when you look at that, they don't want to come to the city to work and just get a lot of money. And actually, the opportunity to make as much money as quickly isn't there anymore either. But younger people want a whole life experience, you know. My daughter's off travelling. She did university and she's off travelling on a 6th country now, which I'm incredibly jealous about, by the way. So we won't talk about that. But she. And then it was clear right from the end that she was going to complete university and she's going to get a job, and then she's gone travelling and she doesn't know what she wants to do, but certainly getting into the city and getting an amazing job straight away was not a priority. And I think that's right. I think actually, how do we contribute back to the planet? How do we contribute back to society? And then how do we have a good life within that makes us whole? Is probably a lens that I'm really hopeful the younger generation are going to really step into that and feel that, because if that's the big shift that needs to change in society. But yeah, poor mental health is an issue worldwide, and it's getting worse. And I don't think it is getting better, but something needs to change. And I guess this conversation, would we be having it 10 years ago? I don't think either of us probably would. Maybe not even 5 years ago. So we're here and we're doing it. And
I think that's a very positive thing that has happened at Deloitte over the last few years, is a number of people have come forward and spoken about their mental health. And we have a really strong mental health network now, which I think is incredibly positive, because it's getting out there how many people actually suffer from. It's the fact that people would be very embarrassed and didn't want anybody to know, and they would cover it up, whereas now, because so many more people are open about it, people do feel they can talk about it and they can get help, and also we do all we can to support them.
And you've also got a really good BAME network, haven't you? And
yes.
I think so. Some couple of years ago, I think I did a chat. I was on a panel for your BAME network, and so going back to sort of the causation bit, I think that the sense of belonging is really critical, and you started with that, Sharon. If you don't feel like you belong in a peer group, and whether that's at work or whether that's in the community or whether that's at your gym, and in order to belong, you need to see people that look like you. I genuinely believe that.
It's a human tribal instinct.
Yeah, and I think we're not as diverse as we should be, and particularly as the more senior you go, there's less women. There's still those glass ceilings exist, but I don't know another Bangladeshi woman CEO. I just don't in the world that I've operated in for the last 20 years. And so on the one hand, I've been like, right, I'm the first, here I go again. And there's that, pioneer, trailblazer, all of that. So I wear that badge with great pride. And I'm really always very conscious of, like yourself, Sharon, mentoring and coaching other people so that I leave that door open and talk about it. But it's when you've got imposter syndrome and you're constantly doubting the fact that you're here and you're here by accident, you have to do a lot of work in yourself to go, I'm here and I'm rightfully here, and so should you be coming along, because it's exhausting. So there are weekends when it's been a tough week for lots of different reasons that I will just not want to get out of bed, because actually I'm drained from coaching and opening the door and dealing with my imposter syndrome and the presentation that I did. And actually, I just
exhausting.
I just don't want to talk to anybody. So it's quite. But the race agenda is I think another big factor in this, because if you've been made to, I grew up in the 80s in Portsmouth. I think Portsmouth is still labelled as one of the top racist cities in the UK. And actually, as a child, on TV we had programmes such as Only Fools and Horses, and the word Paki was used quite regularly. I mean, we don't remember it now, but Only Fools and Horses was a real family programme. We used to all sit around and watch it because it's hilarious. I didn't, at the time when I was watching it, think, oh God, that's a racist word, because that was part of that was just normal. It was the way that it was. And I also remember as a young child in my junior school when we'd gone round to a friend's house afterwards, and we stood at the door. There was about 3 or 4 of us girls. There was, and our friend whose house it was, she sort of shouted into her dad and went, "Can my friends come round?" And he literally, I can still hear his voice, "The packy can't come in." And so that was when I was, I don't know, 10, 11. And actually at the time, I just turned around and went home, and they went in, and that was it. But I don't think that, I think that's very explicit. It's Portsmouth City. You know, I don't want to bang on about Portsmouth being racist, because actually most of my friends were white friends, and you know, I love Portsmouth with all of its issues that it's got, because that's my hometown. But when you've grown up with accepting that you don't belong, I think it's, and whether it's your dad being sexist or that dad being racist, when you've grown up with that and that's just accepted, it's no wonder we walk into a boardroom and you look around and you suddenly go, "Oh my God, I don't belong here." You know, and you go, "Actually, I haven't had this feeling for years." Or I think you were saying earlier that it didn't exist in your early career, but the more senior you got, the more it became. And I think that stuff needs dealing with, which is what you were talking about around therapy. It needs unpacking. You need to understand it.
Yeah, no, you do. But you know, the thing that I hope is going to keep helping transform the workplace is by bringing more and more women through into senior positions, and by bringing more and more people from different ethnic backgrounds through into senior positions. Because, you know, I've talked to people in our BAME network a number of times, and one of the things they say is, "There's no one who looks like me at the top. How can I get there if that's the situation?" And you know, that point about being a pioneer and a trailblazer, I've always felt incredibly, it's a very important thing I want there to be complete equality, and I want women to feel that, you know, if she can do it, then
yeah. And that's something that I, you know, surely if I can do it, look, you know, I left school and this is the career journey, and you know, and anything is possible, and I constantly tell people that. But do you also meet lots of people that are like constantly after the next degree or the next qualification to try and be perfect? In your mentoring as well, it's like, what else can I do to add to my CV so that I can be like you or be in that room? And it's not that they need.
It's, I mean, one of the big things, and you talked about luck earlier, and there, you know, you sort of feel very lucky to be where you are, but actually there is a little bit of an element of luck, because you have to be given opportunities, and you can say, well, that's not luck, but actually to meet the right person, to be then, for them to identify that they're going to give you the opportunity, there's an element of luck in that. When you're very early on, yeah. I ended up with the person who would become our future CEO, John Connolly, you know, in the back of a car traveling to a client, and just had a very positive impact on him in that situation. And so he remembered that, and then he was thinking about, I've got this opportunity, I'm going to give it to Sharon. Yeah. If I hadn't met him and had that interaction, but you then, you get those opportunities, and you need to make the most of them, and you need to grab them, and giving people opportunities and development is what will enable them to keep progressing, and it's encouraging people to put themselves in those positions to get the opportunity. And it isn't another qualification. And interestingly, our American firm did quite a lot of research on how, you know, what's the best way to develop people. And you can go to all of the business schools in the world, but that has a very small impact on how you develop to do your job. And actually, it's having a really challenging project is the thing that you develop on most, you know, whatever it is. And so making sure that women, people from different minority backgrounds get those opportunities is critical to develop them, enable them to progress.
And it's critical for our business success as well, isn't it? I mean, you know, if we don't have diversity around the table, you're going to just repeat doing what you're doing, and you haven't actually got the insights that the younger generation don't just want a huge salary, they want a whole life experience. If you haven't got that insight, how is your business going to be at the cutting edge of whatever the world needs next? So it's not just about leveling the playing field or giving someone the upper hand. you've really got to recognise and be strategic and think, okay, what if as a good marketeer, what insights do I need around this table, and therefore who do I need to connect with? And business is global. It's not, you see, who needs, what faces need to be around this table to represent that global attitude as well.
Absolutely. And we found if you send teams out to clients that are all white male, we've had a number of situations where they've been sent back to the office because they're saying, you don't reflect our business. Yeah. Go back and send us a properly diverse team. And it's that mix of capabilities as well.
You've both been very open with your experiences. I was wondering if you could record something for yourself to listen back to during those dark moments with the little voice in your head, what would you say? I
had some really brilliant presentation coaching not long ago. And the person who was doing it from not about technical presentations, but about how you feel when you're presenting. And she got underneath a lot of my demons. And afterwards, she sent me this little book called You're Amazing. And it's full of little anecdotes about, loving yourself, being positive, thinking, writing down what's gone well, all of those sorts of things. But the title is, You're Amazing. And she put a lovely little note in the front of it. So I do try regularly just to think, you're amazing, because it just makes you feel very positive.
I think for me, I've always told myself anything is possible, and I always the lens that I look at that through, particularly over the last 10 years, is I've got two daughters and I've got 2 stepsons, but particularly for the girls, I think about how they see me, what am I role modeling for them, and so I then reframe everything that I say about myself, so that actually I'm setting a precedent differently for them. So I'm amazing. I've done amazing. That was a really good job. And actually, these are the things that when I'm presenting with my negative thoughts, I think about what would the girls be hearing and how am I influencing that.
And no doubt then realise what you are achieving and what you're leaving them with in terms of their...
Well, Poppy and Sharon, thank you so much for coming and explaining to us all about imposter syndrome and answering this week's question. I think we can all agree that we are all amazing and that anything is possible.
Especially you are in your socks.
But I guess one final question, if you could answer this week's question, will you ever feel good enough in your job?
As of this moment, I'm completely amazing at my job.
So unfortunately, I recognise that when I get a new job, it takes me a few months before I start to feel comfortable. And then after another year or so, then I do start to feel, yes, I belong here. And I just know that I've got to go through that journey whenever and so I will be going on that journey in the next year. And hopefully we'll find it all works brilliantly.
We're going to have to. You're going to have this recording in the background on your phone to listen to, so that we can fast track that together for you.
Yes, thank you.
Please don't underestimate the impact that you're having on listeners, because just listening to you, a couple of things that have been said, and I've thought to myself, yes, that's me. I have that sometimes. You made the point, Sharon, about sometimes not asking a question in a forum because you think, well, it might sound a bit stupid, and then somebody else asks it. I mean, I've had that fairly often, and I'm sure everyone listening will feel the same way. So thank you so much. I think it's massively helpful for everyone listening, and it's been a real privilege to have you both here today.
Thank you. It's been great to have the opportunity, actually, and very lovely to meet Poppy.
Yeah, really lovely to meet you too, Sharon. Thank you.
And fantastic presenters.
Well, we are amazing, aren't we, George?
We are, yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We've got a very special episode coming up next. You'll have to tune in to find out. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.